It was only a couple months ago we tested the Ford Bronco through the snowy off-road course at Road Ameica, and of course on the street. However, that was a 2-door 10-speed automatic with the 2.7-liter turbocharged V6 and the Sasquatch package. What we have today is a 4-door, manual, 2.3-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder that's pretty bare bones. So let's see if it can still do Bronco stuff. This is probably about the most opposite spec Bronco that we could have had as opposed to the Wildtrak that we had earlier this year. Under the skin we have a 2.3-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder, which only makes 275 horsepower and 310 pound-feet. And yes, of course, this is the base engine, so it makes less power. However, it's still more power than you'd get in a 4Runner. In this 4-cylinder you also get better fuel economy. The EPA rates about 18 mpg for Black Diamond 2.3-liter manuals, which is what we have here. But in our week of testing, we've been getting back over 20. And that's with all the time it spends stationary for filming and photos. And of course, the off-roading we did at Road Ameica. Yeah, it's surprisingly efficient for something of this size and weight and this aerodynamics, frankly. And it's also still packing more power than you would get in something like a 4-liter naturally aspirated V6 4Runner. Now this isn't to suggest that it's quick though. 0 to 60 is closer to 8 seconds than it is 7 seconds, so you know there's some of that. But to be honest, like, what did you want from your Rubik's Cube shaped body on frame 4x4? Did you expect it to be a sports car? Power is one thing, but to live with something like a body on frame 4x4 is another. So let's chat about what it's like to live with in the environment that it'll spend 90% of its life, on the road. The most natural competitor to this Bronco is of course the Jeep Wrangler, so we'll talk about it in terms of that. And we talk about on-road manners, well, let's start with steering and how it feels to just drive down the road. This is an independent front suspension, and it has a more traditional rack and pinion along with electronic power steering axle, or steering rack. The Jeep, I think, is the only modern vehicle on sale today that still uses recirculating ball steering. It also has a solid front axle, which is fantastic for rock crawling or hardcore off-roading. However, it means you have to pay a little bit more attention. It means that you don't quite have the same feeling of finesse and composure on the road as you would with something like this Bronco with an independent front suspension and a more traditional steering rack. So it's got pros and cons depending on what you want, but that's just how it shakes out behind the wheel. And I believe it's because this Bronco has independent front suspension and a more traditional steering rack that Ford is able to fit this Bronco, at least in some trims, with an active lane keeping assist, which you won't get in the Wrangler. Then there's ride refinement. The suspension is relatively stiff. These aren't the Bilstein dampers, but even still they are pretty stiff, and you get a good amount of shudder over small to medium road imperfections, especially from the solid rear axle. The ride is livable, but I think the 4Runner has both the Wrangler and Bronco beat on ride quality. And then when we talk about things like cabin refinement and ride refinement, let's keep in mind that you are buying a brick-shaped, ladder-framed 4x4 that is designed to have basically all of the body panels come off. So if you were expecting a Rolls-Royce level ride and interior isolation, no. But again, that's why you buy something like this. You're buying this because you want the open top experience, and that's something that we missed when we had the Wildtrak earlier because we live in Wisconsin, which is terrible and it's always snowy and freezing. But you know, here it's a little bit warmer today. I might take the top off, and that's where the Bronco makes its stand. So ultimately, on the road, this is totally livable if you're willing to make some compromises for the character. The ride is perfectly adequate, the driving dynamics are solid, the power isn't going to set your heart on fire, but honestly, it's enough, and for the big bump in MPG, I'll take it. The only thing I might change is the manual. It's a good throw and a nice pedal box, and I did have fun driving it, but the 10-speed suits what I'm looking for from this vehicle just a touch better. And we'll get into that more now as we head into the forest at Road Ameica. Welcome to the Bronco on the off-road trails at Road Ameica. Thanks again to Eric and John and the whole team for letting us use their facilities once again to test this thing. This is a pretty bare bones Bronco here, but it has all of the essentials here. You've got the 4x4 system, you've got GOAT modes, you've got a locking rear differential, you have a crawler gear. This is the manual, so it's 6 speeds with a crawler gear. That's what I'm in now. And this is a little bit different. I'm not typically used to off-roading with the stick, with 3 pedals, but it's really easy that the way that Ford has done this for you. So essentially all you need to do is take your foot off the clutch and the car will engage. The computer will adjust the revs so you don't stall out, which makes it easier to make more precise inputs when you're trying to crawl over a rock or something. So right now we are currently in mud and ruts mode, which has put 4x4 system on, traction off, and the diff locked in the rear. So we're just gonna go through the forest. So another thing to mention here is that we don't have the big Sasquatch package. We don't have the big 35-inch tires. We do have an all-terrain tire. We have a General Grabber. I think it's an AT3. I'd have to double check. But so it's a smaller tire, which means there's less ground clearance. There's going to be less approach, or Paulo always says approach, less approach, departure, and breakover because of it. And also we were out here in the 2-door, the Wild Track, with the Sasquatch package. So that was the shorter wheelbase, which means that has a better breakover angle as well. So we're in the longer wheelbase, the 4-door, so that can come into play when we hit the hills later on. But no, on the trail here, this thing it looks big, especially in a parking lot. It takes up the full space, but on the trail here, it feels so much more manageable from a size perspective than you would get from something like the Lexus LX 600 that we were just out in. And of course, that's a big full-size 3-row SUV, so this is something a bit different. Steering is super easy. I haven't had my foot on the gas at all, just managing brake every once in a while. This crawler gear is really nice, got a nice consistent speed, about 3 miles an hour, and it's perfectly good. All right, let's hit the hills. Okay, so now we're gonna head out onto the hills that you're all so familiar with. We're gonna get out of the crawler gear because we wanna have a little bit more speed. We're still in mud and ruts because it is a little bit muddy here. And this is where we're really gonna test the breakover, approach, and departure, and also some of the power delivery. I need a little power coming up here. Still in first. I don't have, oh shit. So first gear was not enough. We're probably gonna wanna go into 4 low, just for the amplified gear ratio. So I'm gonna go into neutral. We were in 4 high, 4 low, still mud and ruts, still 4-wheel drive, still rear diff locked. Advanced track off. Okay, here we go. Now it's chugging away. You can hear that 4-cylinder really working. It sounded like we bottomed out just a touch there at the top. But now in 4 low, I don't have my foot on the brake, I don't have my foot on the gas. It kind of almost acts as like a built-in hill descent. You do have trail control here, so I can, or excuse me, hill descent. So I can set a pace if I want to, but I don't think I'm gonna need to here. Right. As we head up to the second hill, still amplified gear ratio. This is where I'm worried about breakover angles. Departure. Oh, the approach angle with these rocks is a little bit tricky. And I've stalled the car because, because the RPMs got too low. So that's the thing, even in 4 low, where it amplifies your gearing, and in first, I probably could have been in crawl for that, but even still, I could have just put the clutch in. But this is the kind of the difficulties and the nuance of off-roading, especially at low speeds, in a 3-pedal vehicle, manual transmission. I mean, this rock garden at the bottom here, and this is a press car too, so you want to be pretty careful with it. That's always pretty tricky. We're not aired down, we don't have big off-road tires on, so you want to be pretty careful. So with lower RPM like that, it gets to be a bit tricky. And then the final hill. This also tests the brake over a little bit here. So in the longer wheelbase, I'm expecting to maybe hit a little bit of bottom, but we do have rock sliders on, so we should be okay. All right, we are at the top then. Yep, a little bit of bottom out there. I don't have my foot on the gas. I don't have my foot on the brake. This is just engine braking, keeping us at this speed. And we'll go through the puddles. Not bad. Let's hit the moguls. Just bopping along in 4 low at 4 miles an hour. Slow as f. So here we come to the moguls. Same deal. 4 low, diff locked, still mud and ruts. I'm gonna leave the window open so you can hear how just hard this transfer case is working. Get up on there. Oh my God, oh my God. This may not have the big tires, but it still gets up there. Wow. I mean, this may be a bare bones spec, it's still a Bronco. Hello, sticks. Okay, so a lot of you will remember from our previous Bronco video that we had pretty strong opinions on how this thing should look to get the true Bronco experience. And a lot of that came from the front fascia. In that one, you had the upgraded grille and headlights, and here you have the base. So rather than the gloss black grille with a lot of little holes in it, you get a scratchy black, darker gray plastic grille with more bigger holes in it, I guess, which it just doesn't look quite as nice. The headlight assembly, this was all LED for the circle and the bar that comes into the grille. It's not here. So it just doesn't quite have the same look. Of course, again, you know, not having the Sasquatch package, not having that big imposing stance also is a contributor to that. But you still have really cool things. You have the accessory points here if you want to attach your limb spreaders to the front of the hood, which is fantastic. You've got cactus gray, which is a really nice color. It's growing on me more and more. Steel bumper, recovery hooks, mild underbody cladding. It's still a Bronco, it's still a 4x4, it's still meant to be taken off-road. Around the side here, again, rather than having like a metal wheel arch, you have plastic. You've got General Grabber AT tires. They do a good job of clearing mud. When I got back onto the road after leaving Road Ameica for their off-road course, again, thank you to them for letting us use their facilities. This thing cleared mud for like a half mile. So it got out there, it did a good job. And even though they're not the 35-inch tires, they're still good off-road as we saw. They're wrapped around Steelies, 17-inch Steelies. These are cool. I saw a Bronco on the street the other day that was Everglades green or whatever the color is, and they had the Steelies painted white, which was something I wasn't expecting to see, but it looked really cool, kind of like a modern, you know, vintage kind of thing. So continuing back, we have the wing mirror. And this is important because it's mounted to like the lower part of the windshield assembly rather than your actual door. So when you take the door off, you can still have, you know, your side view mirrors. They don't have blind spot monitoring, so they have the little additional cutout with the warped glass. Nice thing about this, you have your rock slider here. That's standard on the Black Diamond here. So you got your Black Diamond sticker as well. This is probably the biggest nuisance to me of this entire trim, this Bronco, this Black Diamond trim. You don't have keyless entry. And you do have the little tap-in pad, so if you want to put a code in, that'll work, but I have to get my key out, or the fob out, if I want to get in the truck after it's been locked. So it's a little bit of a nuisance. I wish it had the keyless entry, but again, this is more of a bare bones spec, so I'm not expecting a whole lot. Hardtop roof, it's good. It's a little squeaky. We'll talk about that in the interior. Around back, you have like halogen incandescent, I don't know what they are, but they're not LED taillights. You've got a plastic rear bumper here. You've got a recovery point, at least one back here, Ford logo, spare General AT tire here as well, and a towing package. So it's 3,500 pounds or somewhere just about there for the towing. But let's head inside and talk a little bit more. Okay, so in the cabin here, I know at the top of the video I referenced this as like a bare bones spec Bronco, and here's kind of what I mean and where it starts to show itself. Maybe by saying bare bones it's a little derogatory, so what I'll say is this is the most waterproof spec Bronco that I've ever seen. This is the Black Diamond, so under this there's the actual base trim and then there's the Big Bend, but this is pretty kitted out if you wanted to go off-roading. In this thing there are no carpeted floor mats, there's no rubber floor mats. You have just the bare footwells with the drain plug. You have marine grade vinyl seats for your upholstery, which get a little bit hot on my back during longer driving, but they're going to hold up incredibly well and be really, really durable. And the rest of the materials in here are some sort of combination of plastic or rubber or like synthetic leather. And of course the point of that is to be able to get the sense that you're able to hose this thing out. If you go off-roading, you get really muddy, really dirty in here, it's no problem. This thing can take it, it's durable, strong materials, can get wet. You really could probably just take a hose to this thing and just rinse it out. And that's kind of like a really nice thing to be able to do. And as far as the design, you still have little accents here and there, the blue Ford, and then you've got the metal, Ford Bronco plate down here. So it has a nice kind of sense to it. Starting from the top though, we want to talk about this. Obviously you can take the roof off, we've covered that, we all know that. You've still got your 6 auxiliary switches up here, which is great. Just a standard rear view mirror, you don't have any like auto dimming or anything, but you have a camera or radar sensor up here. It's for your adaptive cruise and that sort of thing. Moving down here, you don't have the influencer kit like we did in the Wild Track, but you do have some pretty nice and integrated storage up here. Your buttons and dials up above your infotainment screen are just for your diff lock, your hazard lights, and of course your traction control. So we don't have the trail turn assist like we did in the Wild Track. And then in front of your steering wheel, you have a semi-digital gauge cluster, which is fine, but since this is the manual, I'd prefer a more traditional RPM gauge or rev counter, more circular. So it's fine, I get along with it. I can heel toe in here. The pedal box is nice. The actual throw on the shifter is pretty good, but I just am used to a more conventional gauge. As far as the driver assistance suite goes, you do have adaptive cruise and some rear cross traffic alert, I believe, but you don't have more advanced things like a lane keeping assist or like the full, kind of blue cruise type stuff. So it won't drive itself for you. The steering wheel itself, though, feels pretty good in your hand. The buttons are rubberized, so again, you're kind of giving that like durable, waterproof, rugged feeling here. You have the smaller infotainment system here, or screen, I should say. But to be honest, if I hadn't been in the Wild Track with the bigger screen, this wouldn't strike me as bass. There's a good amount of bevel around it. I don't know, is it bezel or bevel? I don't know. But it's running the same sync software. Once you get into it and you start playing with it, you notice that there's some things that are missing, but you do have wireless CarPlay, which is fantastic. So you're missing things like, some 360 cameras, your reverse camera's okay. To be honest, most of the time, on the road, I don't really miss anything because I'm just using CarPlay and it's perfectly fine. Where I did miss a couple features was when we were off-road. I missed the trail turn, I missed the 360 cameras and that sort of thing. And then under your head unit, you have physical HVAC controls, which is great to see. They are not dual zone, they are not automatic for climate controls, but they work pretty well. You don't have heated seats, but you sit in this vinyl seat long enough and you're not worried about that anymore. Then as we start to talk about the things that are happening behind the front seat, behind the driver, the rear seats are totally usable. They're a great size, they totally work for this. They're competitive with the Wrangler for the 4-door configuration. And then of course you have like woven map pockets back there, so you can hook carabiners up there. You can do a lot with storage back there. And of course they're vinyl as well, so you can just hose it down if it gets dirty. The biggest improvement though that I wanted to see from this thing was in terms of trunk space. The 2-door the rear seats were unusable. The trunk behind it was arguably even more unusable. This fixes a lot of that. You have a decent sized rear seat, but you have a really big trunk, big enough to fit all of your roof panels. It comes with a carrying case, so they're not scratching against each other. And one of the things that I wanted to see from this that I didn't see in the 2-door was how flat the floor folded. If you're going to go camping, overlanding, and use your vehicle as like your home base or your sleeping quarters, it's nice to have that flat floor. This doesn't quite at the beginning or at the end of the trunk where it butts up against the rear seats. You have about a 2-inch lift. You can equalize it with maybe like some wood or flatten it out that way. It's not a huge deal, but it is something that I noticed, and it's better though than the 2-door. Overall, there are some luxuries missing, but to think you have a really usable interior space that's durable, it's big, and it's easy to spend time in. And I think that's probably a good time to get into the final thoughts. This Bronco 2.3 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder with the manual transmission and the marine interior comes in at $42,720 with destination, which makes it relatively affordable, especially when you consider you're still getting all the character of the roofless and doorless experience. You have all the cargo and practicality you could need, you get over 20 mpg, at least in our testing, and you still have 4-wheel drive, all your GOAT modes, and a rear locker. For a fun daily that can also take you to some of the most remote places on the planet, this Bronco doesn't miss. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.